It was an ordinary Tuesday morning, brisk and bright with the promise of a productive day ahead. The hustle and bustle of downtown was in full swing as workers streamed into the towering office building, their chatter blending with the hum of the city. Among them, a man approached the entrance of a prestigious company that bore his vision, his sweat, and his unrelenting drive. Dressed in a comfortable but modest outfit, a crisp white shirt, jeans, and sneakers, he exuded a quiet confidence that only those familiar with his remarkable journey would recognize. Yet to the untrained eye, he looked like any other passerby, perhaps even an outsider. Inside the building, the company's front desk secretary, a poised and efficient woman named Claire, sat at her post. Claire prided herself on being an excellent gatekeeper. She knew nearly everyone in the building and took her job seriously. Today was no different. Her desk was immaculate, her demeanor professional, and her expression mildly impatient as she clicked away at her computer while keeping an eye on those entering the building. The man stepped into the lobby and glanced around, his sharp eyes taking in the familiar details of the space he had designed. The glossy marble floors, the sleek modern furniture, the illuminated company logo on the wall, it was a testament to years of hard work and sacrifice. But his moment of quiet pride was interrupted by Claire's voice, sharp and direct, cutting through the air like a knife. "Excuse me, sir," she said, not looking up from her screen. "This is a private building. You'll need to state your business or leave." The man turned to her, momentarily startled. He offered a small, polite smile. "Good morning. I'm here for a meeting," he said simply. Claire's gaze flicked up from her computer, giving him a quick once-over. Her practiced eyes swept over his casual attire, and her lips pressed into a thin line. Something about him didn't sit right. He didn't look like the kind of person who belonged in a place like this. Not in this high-powered corporate environment. Certainly not in her company. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, her tone clipped and businesslike. She leaned forward slightly, her hands poised over the keyboard as if ready to confirm his story. The man's smile remained, though a flicker of amusement crossed his face. "Not exactly," he replied. "I don't need an appointment." Claire arched an eyebrow. "Everyone needs an appointment. Who are you here to see?" This was the moment he hesitated, sensing the storm brewing behind her polite facade. He knew exactly what was happening, but he decided to test the waters. "Actually, I'm here to see everyone," he said, his voice calm but laced with a hint of mischief. Claire's patience, already wearing thin, evaporated entirely. She stood from her chair, her heels clicking against the marble as she approached him. "Listen, I don't have time for games. If you don't leave now, I'll have security escort you out." The man tilted his head, his calm demeanor unwavering. "Security? Is that really necessary?" he asked, genuinely curious about how far this encounter would go. Claire folded her arms, her gaze steely. "Sir, this is a professional establishment, and I don't have time for unauthorized visitors disrupting our operations. Please leave before I call for help." By now, a few people in the lobby had begun to take notice. Employees walking in and out of the building glanced curiously at the exchange, their whispers and sideways glances creating a ripple of tension. Claire was acutely aware of their eyes on her, and it only made her more determined to assert control over the situation. The man, however, remained unfazed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a keycard. With a flick of his wrist, he held it up, the company logo gleaming in the morning light. "I think this might clear things up," he said with a small smile. Claire's eyes narrowed as she glanced at the card. Her immediate reaction was suspicion. Anyone could steal or forge a keycard, after all. She snatched it from his hand, her fingers curling tightly around it as she inspected it closely. The weight of it felt real, and the design was unmistakably authentic. But she wasn't ready to concede just yet. "This doesn't prove anything," she said briskly. "Anyone could have gotten their hands on this." The man sighed softly, his patience beginning to wear thin. You're right. It doesn't. But if you scan it, you'll see that it's mine. Claire hesitated, the confidence in his voice making her second-guess herself for the first time. Slowly, she returned to her desk and placed the keycard against the scanner. The machine beeped once, and the screen flashed green, displaying a name that sent a chill down her spine. It was his name. The name of the company's owner. For a moment, Claire froze, her mind racing to make sense of the situation. Her gaze darted from the screen to the man standing before her, the pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. The realization hit her like a freight train, and her face flushed with a mixture of shock and embarrassment. She began, her voice faltering. You're him. The man's smile widened slightly, though there was no malice in his expression. Yes. I'm him. The weight of her mistake settled heavily on her shoulders as she struggled to find the right words. Apologies tumbled from her lips, each one more desperate than the last. I'm so sorry. I didn't recognize you. I didn't mean to. He held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. It's okay, he said gently. I understand. But maybe next time, don't judge someone based on how they look. You never know who they might be. The words, spoken without anger or resentment, was not by accident that this day, so unassuming at first glance, would become one for the company's history books. To understand its significance, one would need to dive into the lives of the two individuals at the center of the storm, Michael Grant, the self-made entrepreneur and owner of the company, and Claire Lawson, the determined but narrow-sighted secretary whose actions would set everything into motion. Michael's story was one of perseverance and ingenuity. Born and raised in a working-class neighborhood on the city's south side, he had grown up watching his parents juggle multiple jobs to make ends meet. Their struggles etched into him a deep sense of responsibility and an unshakable work ethic. As a child, Michael had a keen eye for patterns and a knack for solving complex problems. Whether it was fixing a broken radio or helping his classmates with math homework, he approached every challenge with an insatiable curiosity and a drive to succeed. But success didn't come easily. In college, Michael often found himself as one of the only black students in his engineering program. While others might have buckled under the weight of prejudice and isolation, Michael used it as fuel to propel himself forward. He poured himself into his studies, working nights at a local diner to pay his tuition and spending his days immersed in research and design projects. By the time he graduated, he had already developed a prototype for a revolutionary software system that streamlined business operations, a system that would later become the foundation of his company. Struck a chord deep within Claire. She nodded mutely, her mind a whirlwind of regret and self-reflection. As he turned to leave, heading for the elevator that would take him to the office he built, the lobby buzzed with the aftershocks of what had just transpired. Employees whispered among themselves, some exchanging knowing looks, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Claire sank back into her chair, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to process what had just happened. And as the elevator doors closed behind the man, a small smile played on his lips. This, he thought, would be a day no one in the company would soon forget. Starting the business was another uphill battle. Investors were skeptical of a young, untested entrepreneur, and the tech world was notoriously exclusive. Doors were shut in his face, and opportunities seemed to slip through his fingers at every turn. But Michael was relentless. He worked tirelessly, building his company piece by piece with the help of a small but loyal team. He sacrificed sleep, comfort, and even personal relationships to chase his vision. And eventually, his persistence paid off. The company grew, clients flocked to his innovative platform, and Michael's name became synonymous with success. Despite his achievements, Michael remained grounded. He never forgot the struggles that shaped him or the people who had doubted him along the way. This humility was reflected in the way he ran his business. Michael believed in fostering a culture of respect and inclusivity, values that were enshrined in the company's mission statement and training programs. But even in a company built on such principles, old prejudices and assumptions still lurked in unexpected corners, a reality that would become glaringly apparent on this particular day. Claire Lawson, on the other hand, had a different journey. Born into a middle-class family, she had grown up with a clear understanding of structure and rules. Her father, a retired army officer, and her mother, a schoolteacher, instilled in her a strong sense of discipline and an unwavering belief in order. Claire carried these lessons into adulthood, excelling in her secretarial training and securing a position at one of the city's top firms. Over the years, she became known for her efficiency and no-nonsense attitude, earning the trust of her supervisors and colleagues. When Claire joined Michael's company as the front desk secretary, she saw it as a step up in her career. The company's sleek offices and high-profile reputation were a world apart from her previous roles, and she was determined to prove herself. Claire quickly established herself as the first line of defense against unwelcome distractions, meticulously vetting everyone who entered the building. Her sharp eye for detail and quick judgment became her trademarks, qualities that, while valuable in many situations, would prove to be her undoing on this fateful day. It had started as a typical morning for Claire. She had arrived at the office early, her coffee in hand, ready to tackle the day's challenges. The lobby was quiet at first, save for the occasional employee hurrying past her desk. As the clock ticked closer to 9, the stream of arrivals picked up, and Claire seamlessly juggled her tasks, greeting employees, handling visitor registrations, and fielding calls. She was in her element, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she managed the controlled chaos of the morning rush. Meanwhile, Michael's morning had been equally unremarkable. He had spent the early hours at a local cafe, going over his notes for the day's meetings. He preferred to start his day outside the office, using the quiet time to gather his thoughts and strategize. Today, however, he decided to make an unannounced visit to the office, wanting to observe the team in action without the formalities of a scheduled meeting. It was a decision driven partly by curiosity and partly by a desire to reconnect with the space that had become the embodiment of his life's work. As Michael approached the building, he felt a familiar mix of pride and nostalgia. He had walked this path countless times, each step a reminder of the journey that had brought him here. But as he entered the lobby, he was struck by the way the space seemed to pulse with its own energy. Employees moved with purpose, their conversations tinged with excitement and ambition. It was a far cry from the early days when Michael and his small team had worked out of a cramped basement office, fueled by little more than hope and determination. It was in this moment of reflection that Michael first encountered Claire. At first, he didn't think much of her brusque greeting, attributing it to the natural skepticism of someone in her position. But as their interaction unfolded, it became clear that this was not a simple case of miscommunication. Claire's tone, her body language, and her unyielding stance all pointed to something deeper, a set of assumptions that had nothing to do with Michael's credentials and everything to do with how he looked. For Claire, the encounter was a test of her instincts. She had dealt with her fair share of unauthorized visitors in the past, and her experience had taught her to trust her gut. In Michael, she saw someone who didn't fit the mold of the high-powered executives she was accustomed to dealing with. His casual attire, his calm demeanor, it all seemed out of place in a world defined by suits and power dynamics. And so, she made a decision based on what she thought she knew, unaware that her assumptions were about to be shattered. As the seconds ticked by, the tension between them grew. Michael remained composed, his patience masking the faint sting of disappointment. He had encountered this kind of treatment before, though it never failed to surprise him. Claire, on the other hand, was growing increasingly frustrated, her determination to maintain control clashing with the mounting unease in her gut. The lobby, once a bustling hub of activity, seemed to quiet around them as employees and visitors alike paused to watch the unfolding drama. By the time Claire realized her mistake, the damage had already been done. Her misjudgment, though rooted in years of unconscious bias, felt glaringly obvious in hindsight. For Michael, the moment was a stark reminder of the barriers that still existed, even within a company he had built to transcend them. And as their paths converged in this unexpected and deeply human encounter, both individuals were forced to confront the realities of their own perspectives, a collision of worlds that would reverberate far away. Michael stood in the lobby, his expression calm but subtly amused, as Claire's irritation grew by the second. The faint hum of the air conditioning and the quiet murmur of conversations from employees passing through the lobby only heightened the palpable tension. Claire's mind raced as she tried to maintain control of the situation, her instincts telling her that something wasn't quite right, but her pride refusing to let her reconsider her stance. She was certain this man didn't belong here, and she was determined to do her job. Michael had seen this kind of situation play out countless times before, though never in quite this context. He could sense Claire's resolve hardening as she straightened her posture and prepared to escalate the confrontation. For a moment, he considered simply ending the standoff by revealing his identity outright, but something stopped him. There was a lesson to be learned here, not just for Claire, but for everyone watching. If he handled this right, it could spark a much-needed conversation about assumptions and the biases that so often go unnoticed. Claire tapped her fingers impatiently on her desk, her sharp nails clicking against the polished surface. "Sir, I don't know who you think you are, but I need you to leave now," she said, her voice firm and authoritative. Michael tilted his head slightly, studying her with an expression that was equal parts curiosity and disappointment. "I already told you," he replied, his tone calm and measured. "I don't need an appointment." "That's not how things work here," Claire snapped, her frustration spilling over. "You can't just walk in off the street and expect to gain access to a private business. Do you know how many people try to pull stunts like this?" "Stunts?" Michael repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Do I look like someone who's here to pull a stunt?" Claire hesitated for a fraction of a second, caught off guard by the directness of his question. She quickly recovered, her resolve hardening once again. "It's not about how you look," she said, though her words rang hollow even to her own ears. "It's about protocol. And our protocol is clear: no appointment, no entry." Michael let out a quiet sigh, glancing around the lobby. A small crowd had begun to gather, their curiosity piqued by the escalating confrontation. Employees whispered among themselves, their gazes darting between Claire and Michael as they tried to piece together what was happening. A security guard lingered near the entrance, his hand hovering near the radio on his hip as he watched the situation unfold. On the walls of the lobby, threatening to drown her in a sea of regret and self-recrimination. She replayed the encounter in her mind, each misstep and assumption glaringly obvious in hindsight. How had she been so blind? So quick to judge? The questions gnawed at her, their answers eluding her grasp. As the minutes ticked by, Claire became acutely aware of the whispers around her. The employees who had witnessed the confrontation were still talking, their hushed voices carrying a mixture of shock, curiosity, and even a hint of schadenfreude. Claire wanted nothing more than to disappear, to escape the suffocating weight of their judgment. But she knew she couldn't run from this. She had to face it head-on, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Claire went through the motions of her duties, her mind consumed by the events of the morning. She avoided eye contact with her colleagues, her usual confidence replaced by a lingering sense of vulnerability. By the time her shift ended, she felt emotionally drained, her energy sapped by the weight of her own self-reflection. As she gathered her things and prepared to leave, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The incident had opened a door she couldn't close, a door that led to uncomfortable truths and difficult conversations. And while she didn't know what the future held, she knew one thing for certain: she would never look at her role, or the people she encountered, in the same way again. Michael stood in the elevator, his calm demeanor masking the storm of thoughts swirling in his mind. The encounter with Claire had been both frustrating and illuminating, a reminder that even within the walls of his own company, the biases he had faced his entire life were still present. The senior executive beside him, a longtime ally and friend named Richard, was rattling off updates about ongoing projects, completely oblivious to the tension that had unfolded moments earlier. Michael nodded occasionally, his focus split between Richard's words and the lingering weight of Claire's actions. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing the sprawling executive floor. Sleek glass walls framed the offices, and the hum of activity underscored the space's sense of purpose. As Michael and Richard walked toward his corner office, the employees they passed offered respectful nods and warm greetings. Michael responded in kind, his approachable nature a stark contrast to the stereotypical image of a CEO. When they reached his office, Michael gestured for Richard to take a seat. The room, with its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city, was both imposing and inviting. Michael took his place behind the large oak desk, leaning back in his chair as he considered how to address the situation. He knew he couldn't simply let it slide. This was an opportunity to set a precedent and spark meaningful change. "Richard," Michael began, his tone measured, "before we dive into the updates, I need to talk about something that happened downstairs." Richard raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What's on your mind?" Michael recounted the encounter with Claire, his words deliberate but devoid of malice. He described her assumptions, her resistance, and the eventual reveal of his identity. As he spoke, Richard's expression shifted from curiosity to concern, his brow furrowing as he absorbed the details. "That's disappointing," Richard said finally, his voice tinged with disbelief. "I can't believe something like that would happen here, of all places." "It's disappointing, yes," Michael agreed, "but it's also a reality we can't ignore. Biases like this exist everywhere, even in environments we've worked hard to make inclusive. The question is, how do we address it?" Richard nodded thoughtfully. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking this is bigger than Claire," Michael said. "She made a mistake, but she's not the only one who could fall into the same trap. This is about creating awareness and accountability across the board." Before Richard could respond, there was a knock at the door. Michael called for the person to enter, and Claire stepped inside, her face pale and her posture stiff with tension. She held a folder tightly against her chest, as if it were a shield against the judgment she feared. Michael could see the nervous energy radiating from her, but he also noticed something else: determination. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Claire said, her voice wavering slightly. I needed to speak with you." Richard glanced at Michael, who nodded, signaling that it was okay. Claire stepped further into the office, her eyes darting between the two men as she struggled to find the right words. Finally, she took a deep breath and spoke. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice steadying. "What I did downstairs was unacceptable. I made assumptions about you based on nothing but appearances, and I was wrong. There's no excuse for it." Michael regarded her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Thank you for saying that," he said finally. "But an apology is just the beginning. What happened downstairs isn't just about me, it's about how we treat people, regardless of their role, their background, or how they look." Claire nodded, her grip on the folder tightening. "I understand that now. And I want to do better. I'm willing to take whatever steps are necessary to make this right." Michael leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "Good. Because there's a lot of work to be done. Starting with you." Claire's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't flinch. "What do you mean?" "I want you to lead the charge on this," Michael said. "We're going to implement a company-wide training program on unconscious bias and inclusivity, and I want you to be a part of it. Your experience, what you did, and what you've learned from it, can be a powerful lesson for others." Claire's mouth opened slightly in surprise. She had expected reprimands, perhaps even termination, but this was something entirely different. It was an opportunity to turn her mistake into something meaningful. I don't know if I'm the right person for that, she said hesitantly. You are, Michael said firmly. You're willing to own your mistake, and that's the first step. But this isn't about doing it alone. We'll provide the resources and support you need to make an impact. Claire looked down at the folder in her hands, her mind racing. She had spent years priding herself on her professionalism and efficiency, but this was a different kind of challenge, one that required vulnerability and introspection. Finally, she met Michael's gaze and nodded. I'll do it, she said, her voice resolute. I don't want what happened today to ever happen again, to anyone. Michael offered her a small, encouraging smile. Good. That's what I wanted to hear. As Claire turned to leave, Michael glanced at Richard, who had been silently observing the exchange. Richard gave a subtle nod of approval, his respect for Michael's leadership growing with each passing moment. When Claire left the office, she felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, shame, and determination all swirled within her, creating a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. The weight of her mistake was still there, but now it felt like something she could use to build a better foundation, not just for herself, but for the entire company. Back in his office, Michael leaned back in his chair, his mind already racing with ideas for the training program. This wasn't just about fixing one mistake, it was about addressing a systemic issue that had long gone unspoken. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he also knew it was necessary. As the sun began to set over the city, casting a warm golden glow across the office, Michael allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. Today had been a stark reminder of the challenges that still existed, but it was also a testament to the power of accountability and growth. And in the end, that was what mattered most, the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths and emerge stronger on the other side. And take action. Others were more skeptical, questioning whether her apology was genuine or simply a way to save face. But regardless of their opinions, one thing was clear, the email had sparked a conversation that couldn't be ignored. Michael, too, was impressed by Claire's initiative. Her email reinforced his belief that she was the right person to spearhead the inclusivity program, and he made a point to publicly support her efforts. At the next company-wide meeting, he addressed the incident head-on, sharing his own perspective and emphasizing the importance of self-reflection and growth. He encouraged everyone to examine their own biases and to approach the upcoming training sessions with an open mind and a willingness to learn. The training program, which began a few weeks later, was unlike anything the company had done before. It wasn't just about checking boxes or meeting diversity quotas, it was about fostering meaningful conversations and challenging deep-seated beliefs. Claire worked closely with HR and external consultants to develop a curriculum that was both informative and engaging, incorporating real-life examples, interactive exercises, and open discussions. The sessions weren't easy. Many employees struggled with the discomfort of confronting their own biases, and some resisted the idea that they even had biases to begin with. But as the weeks went on, the atmosphere began to shift. Employees started sharing personal stories of times they had been judged unfairly or had made assumptions about others. The honesty and vulnerability on display were both humbling and inspiring, creating a sense of solidarity that hadn't existed before. One particularly powerful moment came during a session led by Claire herself. She recounted the events of the lobby incident, this time with raw emotion and unflinching honesty. She described her thought process in detail, the assumptions she had made about Michael based on his appearance, the way her frustration had clouded her judgment, and the overwhelming shame she had felt when the truth was revealed. Her words were met with a profound silence, the weight of her story hanging heavy in the room. "I'm not proud of what I did," Claire said, her voice steady despite the tears glistening in her eyes. "But I am proud of what I've learned from it. And I hope that by sharing my story, I can help all of us do better, not just here at work, but in our lives outside these walls." The room erupted in applause, the sound echoing off the walls like a thunderclap. Michael, who had been sitting quietly in the back, felt a swell of pride as he watched the transformation unfold. Claire had turned her moment of failure into a catalyst for change, and the impact was undeniable. Outside the company, the story of the lobby incident began to gain traction as well. Employees shared their experiences on social media, using hashtags like #GrowThroughMistakes and #BiasAwareness to spread the message. Local news outlets picked up the story, framing it as a powerful example of accountability and leadership. Michael's decision to give Claire a chance to make amends was widely praised, with many commentators lauding his approach as a model for addressing workplace conflicts. The newfound attention brought both challenges and opportunities. On one hand, the company faced increased scrutiny, with critics questioning whether the incident reflected deeper systemic issues. On the other hand, the publicity attracted a wave of job applicants eager to join a company that was willing to confront its shortcomings and grow from them. Michael took the criticism in stride, using it as an opportunity to double down on the company's commitment to inclusivity and transparency. By the end of the training program, the company felt like a different place. The once unspoken biases that had lingered beneath the surface were now being actively addressed, and employees reported feeling more connected to one another than ever before. Claire, for her part, had earned a newfound respect from her colleagues. Her vulnerability and determination had transformed her from a gatekeeper into a bridge builder, someone who was no longer afraid to admit her flaws and learn from them. For Michael, the experience was both humbling and empowering. It had reminded him of the challenges he still faced as a Black entrepreneur, even within his own company. But it had also shown him the power of leadership, empathy, and second chances. As he walked through the office one evening, greeting employees and exchanging smiles, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The company he had built was far from perfect, but it was growing, and so were the people within it. The fallout from that fateful day in the lobby had been profound, but it had also been transformative. And as the company moved forward, its employees carried with them a shared commitment to creating a culture of understanding, respect, and inclusion, one conversation, one action, and one day at a time. Months had passed since the day in the lobby, and the company was no longer the same. What began as an uncomfortable and deeply personal encounter between Michael and Claire had grown into a catalyst for profound change, not only within the company but in the lives of those who worked there. Yet, the memory of that morning lingered, not as a source of shame but as a reminder of the power of vulnerability, accountability, and growth. Michael often reflected on the journey the company had taken since that day. Sitting in his corner office late one evening, he gazed out at the glittering city skyline. His thoughts drifted back to the emotions he felt when Claire had initially dismissed him, to the weight of assumptions he had carried for much of his life, and to the choice he had made to turn a moment of bias into an opportunity for learning. It had not been an easy road, but it had been worth every step. Downstairs, the lobby had undergone a transformation of its own. Michael had insisted that the space be reimagined as more than just a point of entry. It was now a living testament to the company's values. A large mural adorned one wall, depicting diverse hands reaching toward a shared light. Below the mural was a plaque that read, "Growth begins with understanding. Understanding begins with listening." Employees and visitors alike often paused to read the words, their gazes lingering on the vibrant artwork that represented the collective spirit of the company. Claire stood near the mural that evening, watching as a cleaning crew polished the floors and prepared the building for the next day. The lobby, once a place where she had unknowingly let her biases take center stage, now felt like a symbol of redemption. The echoes of her misstep had given her purpose, and she had worked tirelessly to ensure that no one else would feel the sting of being judged unfairly. The inclusivity training program she had spearheaded had become a staple of the company's culture. What began as a series of workshops had evolved into an ongoing initiative that included mentorship programs, community outreach, and quarterly discussions on topics ranging from equity in the workplace to cultural awareness. Employees who had once been reluctant participants now volunteered to lead sessions, sharing their own stories and fostering an environment of trust and collaboration. One such session, held just days earlier, had been particularly memorable. A junior employee named Elena, who had joined the company shortly after the lobby incident, had shared a story of her own experience with bias. Her voice trembled as she described how a previous employer had dismissed her ideas, assuming her accent meant she lacked intelligence. As she spoke, her colleagues listened intently, their faces reflecting a mixture of empathy and outrage. When she finished, the room erupted into applause, and Claire couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. This was what change looked like, people feeling seen, heard, and valued. Michael had attended that session, sitting quietly at the back of the room. He watched as Claire facilitated the discussion with a skill and grace that belied her initial hesitation to take on the role. It was clear that she had found her calling, and Michael couldn't have been prouder. Later, as they walked back to their offices, he had turned to her and said, "You're making a difference, Claire. More than you know." That moment stayed with her as she stood in the lobby that evening. She thought about how far she had come since that fateful morning, the journey from defensiveness to introspection, from shame to empowerment. It hadn't been easy. There were moments when she had questioned whether she was strong enough to confront her own flaws or whether she deserved the second chance Michael had given her. But each step forward had reinforced her belief that growth was possible, even in the face of the hardest truths. As Claire left the lobby and stepped into the cool night air, she glanced up at the illuminated logo of the company. It felt different now, not just a symbol of innovation and success but a beacon of hope and resilience. The building itself had become a testament to the idea that people, like organizations, could evolve if they were willing to confront their shortcomings with courage and humility. For Michael, the transformation of the company was just one piece of the puzzle. He had begun to think about how the lessons learned within those walls could ripple outward into the broader community. He initiated partnerships with local schools and nonprofits, offering workshops on leadership and bias awareness. Employees volunteered their time to mentor students, sharing their own stories of growth and resilience. The company's story became a case study, shared at conferences and business forums as an example of how to turn a crisis into a movement for change. But the impact wasn't limited to professional spaces. Employees began to carry the lessons they had learned into their personal lives. Some shared how the training had opened their eyes to biases they hadn't realized they held. Others spoke about how it had helped them navigate difficult conversations with friends and family. The ripple effect was real, and it was powerful. One evening, Michael hosted a town hall meeting, inviting not just employees but their families and members of the community to join. Standing at the podium, he spoke candidly about the journey the company had taken. From its humble beginnings to the challenges it had faced and the growth that had come from those challenges. He emphasized that the work was far from over, but he expressed hope that the progress they had made would inspire others to start their own journeys. At the end of his speech, he posed a question that hung in the air like a challenge and an invitation: what kind of world do we want to create, and what are we willing to do to make it a reality? The room erupted into applause, but Michael's gaze lingered on the faces of the people before him, each one a reminder of the potential for change that lay within every individual. As he stepped off the stage, he was met by Claire, who extended her hand. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice filled with gratitude. "For giving me the chance to learn and grow. For believing I could be better." Michael shook her hand, his expression warm. "We all have room to grow, Claire. What matters is what we do with the opportunity." As the night wore on, the conversation in the room buzzed with energy and possibility. Employees mingled with community members, sharing ideas and forging connections. The company, once simply a place of work, had become a hub for dialogue and progress, a place where people were not just employees but agents of change. In the weeks that followed, Michael often found himself reflecting on the question he had posed at the town hall. It was a question with no easy answers, but it was one worth asking again and again. And as he looked around at the company he had built, he felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the success it had achieved, but for the people who had made that success possible. The story of the lobby incident had become a part of the company's history, not as a moment of failure but as a turning point. And as the company continued to grow, its employees carried with them the lessons of that day, that assumptions can be challenged, that mistakes can be transformed into opportunities, and that growth is always possible, both for individuals and for the communities they create together.